It has been about 7 months since I uploaded my farewell address to the retro gaming community. Over the course of that time, I've re-watched my own video, reflected upon it, and remained convinced that if I were to make that video today, that I would have done it the exact same way. In today's video, I wanted to share a little more about myself and to address why I've removed all my times and forum posts from speedrun.com. As many of you know, I am a Roman Catholic. And one thing that is nice about being Catholic is that I have a firm perspective on reality, on nature, and on morality. The spirit of the age can go where it wants, social trends can grow and fade, and no matter what, I remain rooted in and convinced of Catholic ethics. As some in our culture are drifting further to the left, I remain steady and committed to the preservation of traditional values. As many of you remember, I had created a retro Twitch team called Retro Craze that positioned itself as gaming only. It was about gaming, and it wasn't about gender or what people like to do with their genitals, which is one of the consequences of using the LGBT tag. It was an environment that promoted gaming commentary and gaming content. Gaming only was an all-inclusive approach to gaming because it, one, streams to the broadest audience possible, two, is a safe place for all and not just for some, and three, is a unifying factor, common interest, shared passion that we could all come together. We don't need to be constantly confronted with the consequences of bad philosophy. Rather, we just wanted to enjoy watching great retro games without being exposed to ethical differences regarding sexual behavior and conflicting transgender ideologies, all of which is not why we were watching. When the Retro Craze team shared its criteria for what was required to be part of the gaming-only culture, we were met with the most uncharitable reaction imaginable. For no other reason than LGBT activists were not going to be allowed to use the team to promote themselves. Due to the militant activism of the radical left, we witnessed the most deplorable display of hate posts, false narratives, and a lot of broken relationships. We were vindicated when, after sending all our policies, posts, and plans to Twitch, along with all the demonstrations of toxicity concerning the matter on Twitter, not only were we not suspended, but Twitch never attempted to deplatform or correct anything we were doing. When people reported and complained about the gaming-only team to Twitch, these instigators were left with nothing but silence. Why did Twitch do nothing? Because Retro Craze did nothing wrong. And a gaming-only team was just another aspect of the diversity of the Twitch platform. But as a result of the assault upon our decency, people were able to see just how intolerant some people were in the retro community, so much so that they could not even tolerate a team that focused on gaming alone, which was very telling. They demanded ideological conformity to their philosophical notions and refused to accept anything less than uniformity in thought and practice, in clear violation of the integrity of gaming and respect for the intellectual and social diversity of those who engage in the hobby. They claim that they were justified in their hateful behavior because they feel that they have been oppressed. But instead of working together with others to create a more inclusive environment, like one that focuses on gaming only, they became the oppressors and waged ideological warfare against anyone who would deviate from woke orthodoxy, demanding allegiance and accepting nothing less than joining in on their activism. I've been repeatedly told by these people that I must be an activist, that I must use all of my influence to promote LGBT ideology, and if I don't, then I will be treated as an oppressor. As I have shared with people before, I'm a Roman Catholic, so I cannot support other people in their sins and depraved perspectives, no matter how much they bully me, threaten me, or try to coerce me. From a Catholic perspective, to love is to will the good of the other, and therefore these lifestyles and perspectives cannot have my support because they are bad for people. Some confuse liberty and licentiousness, promote and propose that we should just support each other in whatever it is that we are doing. But vice always ensnares the will and weakens the intellect. I cannot be part of it. I cannot support it, and under no condition can I be associated with it. The people in our society want to circle the drain and dive deep into all manner of depravity. then I cannot be involved. I assume by now that people have begun to wonder why I no longer use speedrun.com. In my farewell address to the speedrunning community, I made it very clear that I no longer wanted to be associated with those non-gaming elements which conflicted with my Catholic faith. People demanded that I become an LGBT ally, and they did not take no for an answer. Yet these problems are not only among those in gaming venues, but we can see that in our culture has been infected with this militant activism that seeks to shape our national dialogue, redefine words, pervert our youth, saturate our culture with depravity, and use compulsory speech and intimidation tactics to change the way we think and understand the world. We are not just talking about a diverse group of people all expressing their particular views and understanding of themselves. It is rather a very exclusive environment where only certain ideas and concepts will be tolerated. And all of this, of course, is contrary to that true diversity that makes up those who enjoy gaming as a hobby, those who honor intellectual diversity, and who resist ideological conformity. These anti-Catholic bigots who are not capable of having friends that disagree with them would be more than happy to exclude Catholics and others from their gaming communities, denying God's existence, and replacing the resultant religious void with the philosophy of secular progressivism. The mass majority of people simply want to play video games and engage with others about games, no matter their philosophical convictions or intellectual commitments. It would have been advantageous for the community as a whole to decide that we were going to allow intellectual diversity, or at the very least create an environment that is a safe space for all, which is exactly what keeping it gaming would achieve. Any other proposal establishes a tyrannical regime that weeds out Catholics and others that cannot support their perspectives through a kind of social inquisition. I always thought that by keeping our conversations to gaming subjects only, and only using gaming elements on our streams, that we could stream to the broadest audience possible, knowing very well that too many non-gaming elements can be distracting, and that it would create an environment where the determining factor as to why we don't watch a particular gamer is rooted in the fact that we disagree with them on philosophy, culture, or politics. Given the freedom of expression that most of us utilize on these social platforms, it is no wonder that we will see a great deal of differences between all of us. And of course, if we were simply cognizant of the fact that this wide diversity is just part of what it means for gaming to be inclusive, we would admit that anyone was welcome because gaming would be the unifying factor, our shared passion, our common interest. But this is simply not tolerated by some. It isn't enough for them to think for themselves, but that we must think exactly as they do. And if you don't, they have a list of names they will call you and a list of social engineering tactics to employ in an attempt to force conformity. These depraved people, these anti-religious bigots, these Catholic phobes demand absolute allegiance from everyone and force their perspectives and pronouns into the public to be seen by everyone, and complain anytime people attempt to put forth their own ideas and refuse to anyone else their own desire to share themselves or their views. They claim oppression while engaging in oppressive behaviors towards those who disagree with them. They claim to be discriminated against, but yet they treat Catholics and others differently by unfriending them, ostracizing them, attacking them, banning them, blocking them, all of which are clear violations of non-discrimination policies. I am willing to be your friend, but yet you are unwilling to be mine. People are seeing who the real bigots are. The concept of gaming only was indiscriminately applied. It was an idea that was proposed to all so that non-gaming conflicts would not occur, and then by your very actions proved the very reason why non-gaming subjects should be avoided, which remains as the single most vindication of retro craze. But these people actually demanded non-gaming conflict. They wanted ideological warfare to infect our gaming culture, and they will use any platform for their militant activism. If they only wanted to create a space for themselves to be left alone in what they wanted to do, they could have extended the same courtesy to others and respect our request to be left alone, to engage in our gaming hobby without the constant confrontation of non-gaming elements. These people demand that their sexual perversity and their gender confusion saturate the gaming culture so that there is nowhere you can go where our eyes and ears are not constantly raped with unwanted content which we did not consent to observe. When we go to a gaming-related site, we're not expecting to be confronted by the decay of Western society. The element that drove me to disengage even further was a recent article on speedrun.com entitled Women in Speedrunning. From what I could tell, there weren't any women highlighted in this article, and there are tons of people who think that such an article should have been about women. I can think of a ton of women who speedrun, not only retro, but a lot of other gamers as well. So, in light of that, I'm standing up on behalf of the integrity of women. People want to redefine what it means to be a woman, and then attack those women who speak out in their defense. They want to redefine women to invade their spaces. They redefine marriage to promote their sexual perversity. They redefine a baby so they can engage in their murderous tendencies. They redefine everything so they can destroy our liberty with licentiousness, dismantle social norms rooted in traditional values, and continue to lead humanity into deeper depravity. I'm throwing my lot in with women who deserve a lot more from our culture than the trans trending that has been intrusively pushing itself into women's spaces. These forces have been chemically castrating children, mutilating their bodies, perverting them at the youngest of ages with trans ideology, a drag queen story hour, and even depraved parents who have found a new way to express their Munchausen tendencies. 2-year-old children have no clue what these perverse parents are saying when they present their children to the world as gender fluid or gender creative, and we need to stop pretending that this is acceptable. Our culture has been based on and generally unified in the language and concepts which we have used to understand ourselves. We understand a woman to be the normative biological outcome of that female component of our sexually dimorphic species. And as a culture, we have rightfully segregated our bathrooms, locker rooms, and sports, as well as the field of medicine to appreciate and preserve the integrity of women. In recent days, it has been popularized to broaden the use of the term woman to such an extent that it no longer distinguishes what a woman is from a man. And that is exactly what it means to preserve the integrity of women, is to distinguish them from the male component of our sexually dimorphic species. If woman is to mean anything at all, it must be based on and rooted in normative biological outcomes. Otherwise, the term is hollowed out and infused with any meaning whatsoever, so that in the end, there will be as many meanings as to the term as there are minds to conceive them. And if we are not using the term in the same manner, then we eliminate the possibility of having any meaningful dialogue. It is not at all amusing that some people who speak of erasure of an entire group of people within our population, who have no qualms in using the term woman in such a broad sense as to include non-women, and render the term useless. There are plenty of women who enjoy and participate in speedrunning that would have been perfectly suitable for such an article. Maybe write an article that highlights people who self-identify as trans. That would be much more appropriate. And for those not aware, this is not an LGBT versus non-LGBT conflict. I've spoken with many people who self-identify as trans who are attacked and called bigots and transphobes because they don't think the same as other trans people on this matter. In that case, this is not even about people who identify as trans. It's about ideological warfare that challenges, deconstructs, and destroys traditional norms and values. This is not surprising since during the course of conversations with self-identifying trans individuals, they all posited a different basis for why they are trans, and each conception denied the existence of others. It would be a mistake to speak of the trans community as if it is a monolithic reality where everyone thinks the exact same thing. Rather, there is a lot of conceptual conflict with no possibility of resolution. One person claimed to be a female soul in a male body. Another claimed to have a female brain in a male body. Another claimed that gender was a mere social construct. Others spoke of gender as non-malleable, and others think of themselves as gender fluid. Some think it is subjectively rooted in their perception, and others think it is rooted in their objective biology. Some refer to themselves as suffering from a mental illness. Others are offended by the notion. Despite all of these claims, the most pertinent is that some who refer to themselves as trans women would never take the word woman to describe themselves. It is a conflict that is deeply embedded in the ambiguity created by changing the definition of gender and woman. As soon as the word woman was disassociated from the normative biological outcome, untethered from the female component of our sexually dimorphic species, the word took on any meaning a person wants to give to it. Removing the term woman from this standard causes the term to become inflated, and the continual flood of woman concepts into the culture only exasperates the problem. This process has devalued the term and has weakened its cultural utility. And in all reality, this is an attempt to redefine humanity according to non-normative biological outcomes. For instance, we know what is healthy because we have observed nature and established a baseline by which we have come to assess people's health. We know what normative biological outcomes are because we have observed how rare deviations from this norm actually are. Perhaps if what we see as rare was actually normative, then our understanding of what nature intends would be much broader. But in point in fact, we are able to identify when someone lies outside of the range of normacy because we do have normative outcomes. We have diagnostic tools by which we can assess, by means of criteria, deviations in both the medical and psychological fields, and by this we know when someone is not physically or mentally healthy. And none of this should encourage anyone to speak ill of those who suffer from chromosomal aberrations, hormonal abnormalities, childhood trauma, or any other biological anomaly that causes ambiguity and psychological distress. In fact, we should be all the more sensitive and compassionate towards them. But this does not at all require that we redefine everything in Western civilization. Beyond those conditions which some refer to as intersex, or any number of ways that one experiences genetic deviations from normative outcomes that can influence our lives, there exists an ideological component to this militant activism that seeks out to change the meaning of words and force ideological conformity upon others, that you must accept the new definitions, and that you must agree with all the terms and concepts which some people utilize to construct their identity. This is the ideology of self-invention. Those influenced by secular progressivism in our age really have no other course than to define oneself, which ultimately is an act in futility. If meaning and purpose is defined and created within a relativistic vacuum, then I'm not surprised that people are suffering from poor mental health and in some cases suicide. For if only in this life we can have hope, then we are of all men most miserable. If the general aim of all of our lives is the temporary avoidance of emptiness, all the while thinking that an eternal nothingness awaits them, the permanent extinction of your consciousness, that your final end is without any meaning at all, I think we put up with it easily enough. People try to lose themselves in hedonism, that pleasure is the highest good and proper aim of human life, that our goal is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain at all costs, while we await our infinite void. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, they say. We engage in all manner of self-indulgence and go about our lives with an inflated sense of self-importance and cultivating a grievance culture. It is if the consciousness emerged only to find itself drowning, thrashing about helplessly and grasping upon anything within reach, knowing all the while that its end is near. You do anything you can to avoid the logical consequences of your life and at the very least deny its implications. But let me tell you this. You have on occasion had moments when you realize that your present way of life is not satisfying to you, that you are unhappy. You entertained yourself with all manner of ideations and explored every possible inclination. And even though you have given to yourself anything you desired, you ultimately found that the more you surrendered your intellect to base passions, the more unhappy and unfulfilled you have been. You have not deprived yourself of any pleasure, and you have done all that one can do to avoid emotional pain, but yet you are without peace. And even the slightest annoyance causes you to flail about upon the floor, driven by entitlement and insatiable instant gratification. If you have to define yourself, then you have already conceded that your life is objectively without meaning. This is exactly what sin does to us. It strips us of meaning, purpose. Not only does it leave us in such a hopeless state, it leads you to take pride in it, all the manner knowing that you were meant for more in life. You have allowed vice to weaken your will, to hinder your intellect, and to misdirect your passions. You have completely ignored these words. Whatever weakens your reason, impairs the tenderness of your conscience, obscures your sense of God, takes off your relish for spiritual things, whatever increases the authority of the body over the mind, that thing is sin to you, however innocent it may seem in itself. You deserve so much better than your present way of life, and the gaming community deserves so much better than the way some are frequently treated. And too often, detransitioners, those who were once influenced by trans ideology, have been attacked by trans activists, ostracized by the LGBT community, and called bigots and transphobes for no other reason than their life is no longer a success story for trans militant activism. But consider this, all the detransitioners of today were the transitioners of yesterday, and all your friends who are supporting your transition today will abandon you when you become a detransitioner tomorrow. In fact, I highly recommend that you read the stories of people who were once misled by trans ideology and how it ended up wrecking their lives. A week prior to the article on speedrun.com, there was an ad that said, "Save Roe." That is, in relation to the Supreme Court case, Roe versus Wade. I went to speedrun.com to see people's game performances on the leaderboards. I was not interested in ads that promote the slaughtering of children and ripping them limb from what should be the safest place in the universe, their mother's womb. As a Catholic, I cannot support chemically castrating the body. I cannot support bodily mutilation. I cannot support the murder of innocent children. I cannot support anything that is harming you. Health is about the restoration of bodily function. Consider those who struggle with body dysphoria disorders, who feel and perceive flaws in their bodies that are not objectively there, such as a woman who is healthy but sees an obese person in the mirror. Consider those with body integrity dysphoria, where an able-bodied person feels and perceives themselves to be disabled, and often request of doctors to amputate the undesired but healthy limb. The best treatment for anyone is not to indulge these depraved perceptions, especially by removing body parts. As a Catholic, I cannot support the damaging of perfectly healthy body parts. Most people who experience any measure of a discordant identity tend to grow out of it. And if these people are constantly encouraged to chemically and surgically mutilate themselves, then we will end up with a growing number of detransitioners who desire to have their body parts back. You must understand that Catholic teaching has a very detailed sexual ethic which speaks of the conjugal act as being unitive, that is, in accordance with functional compatibility and genital complementarity, and as being procreative, that it is completely open to life, not hindered by chemical manipulation, bodily mutilation, or physical obstruction. The Church firmly teaches that marriage can only exist between a man and a woman. Divorce and remarriage is not possible. All homosexual acts are inherently disordered and sinful, and all forms of contraceptives reduces the marital act to mutual masturbation. Is it no wonder why a Catholic cannot support the LGBT movement? It violates my sense of morality, and I refuse to abandon my convictions, which I shall carry even unto the point of martyrdom. As a Catholic, I can no longer participate on a gaming site that should focus on gaming, but instead functions as a platform for propaganda that violates my sense of morality. The site should remain focused only on gaming matters. Instead, it has participated in the most dangerous and demonic deception of our day. As a Catholic, I am morally obligated to push back against a culture that wants to trans to little children. I am morally obligated to share the gospel with a depraved and sinful generation that will perish without a sense of God. Love demands that I will the good of the other, not anything and everything they might desire for themselves, but what is objectively good for them. I cannot support pride or lust, but I can only support traditional values and virtues. People have incorrectly believed that true liberty is to be emancipated from traditional values and virtues, to be able to do whatever a person wants, and to engage in any vice. But I say to you that sin and vice will enslave your will. It will dampen your reason and drive you further away from human dignity, and will lead you further into depravity, where you will be moved by your passions instead of them being governed by your intellect. People have wrongly concluded that they are the sum total of all their ideations and inclinations, that this is who you are, and that true freedom is to indulge them as much as possible, and that any influence, whether internal or external, to the contrary, needs to be resisted. But often this includes the working of God's grace in the human heart, which involves the convictions which we have at times experienced, although it is true that the generality of men stifle them as soon as possible, and after a while forget, or at least deny, that they ever had them at all. While there are those who have seared their conscience as with a hot iron, I pray that you allow God's grace and influence to strike deep root within you, and deliver you from a blind, unfeeling heart, quite insensible of God and the things of God. The day will come when you will regret your present way of life. When that day comes, remember only this: the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses from all sin. And I pray that day shall pass.